everyone, welcome back to another video. It's too late in March, in the month of March, for me to publish my reading wrap up for the month of February, so I'm just not gonna do that. Instead, we're just generally gonna talk about the books that I've recently read, including the ones in February, and what I'm presently reading. Okay, let's talk about the books I've recently read. I will be honest, February was not the best reading month for me, just for like a variety of different reasons, and I wasn't able to read too much either, but I do have some duds and some loves. So the first one I finished reading was The Viscount Made Me Do It by Diana Quincy. It's a second book in her Clandestine series. You've heard me talk a lot about this series, but if you haven't, it's a historical fiction series, a Regency era romance series. Set in like Regency England, except the difference here is that our main characters, our heroines, are Palestinian women, and it's really nice to see that type of diversity in fiction. And so Diana Quincy herself is a Palestinian American woman, and all of her heroines are either like Palestinian descendants or Palestinian themselves, and it's nice to see like a clash between them and then like the royal dukes and lords and all of that. So these are romance books, and they are definitely heavier on like the spice. That's definitely something to be cognizant of as you kind of go in, but I've just really enjoyed that mishmash of it. And what's really cool about her books is that they're not just romance, like it is the big plot. The main plot is a romance, but there is like a murder mystery thrown in there, or like family drama thrown in there, like a classic whodunit, and I really appreciate that. It just gives me more substance to kind of hold on to and keep myself entertained besides just the romance. And you know that I don't like a book that's just a romance. I need something else to go with it. So similarly, I also read the third one in the series, which was The Marquess Makes His Move. This one was my least favorite. I will say there was again like a mystery in here as well. The Viscount Made Me Do It was probably one of my favorite ones in the entire Diana Quincy books I've read to date, and I've read now like 4 of them, because the female character was like, the protagonist was like super kind of like strong-headed, and you know, she's like a merchant and she wants to be like a chiropractor, in addition to her being like merchant class and not being from like the aristocracy. Like it added like layers of realistic barriers to them being together, and you got to see like her journey as well, so it was fun. So check the series out if you're looking for like a new romance that's also quite like culturally like inclusive, I guess. It's nice. After that, I read Aisha at Last by Uzma Jalaluddin. This is not my first Uzma Jalaluddin book. If you'll remember, last year I read, what was it, 3 Holidays and a Wedding? That was co-authored by Uzma Jalaluddin and Marissa Stapley. But Uzma Jalaluddin is she's a South Asian Canadian woman, and she writes like stories with like South Asian female characters, and I really like, it's not just South Asian female characters, like she has like hijabi, you know, girls that are like her main characters, and it's so refreshing to see that population like visually represented in mainstream stories as main characters, not just side characters. So I like that whole appeal. What drew me to Aisha at Last is described as like a South Asian retelling of Pride and Prejudice. Maybe I'm just not the biggest Pride and Prejudice fan, because this book didn't really like do it for me, but I gave it about 3 stars. It had some really nice cultural aspects. So the main characters in this book are, you know, devout kind of, well, they're devout Muslims, and there's like a lot of mention and storyline is woven around like them being like practicing Muslims, and you know, like a lot of the story set in the mosque. It's really cool. I love it. But I felt that at sometimes I got like really simplistic, and it just didn't like do it for me. The main guy in it was a little bit Darcy-like, but then his switch was just like too convenient, and it was lacking in depth. So maybe I'm not being super articulate here. It was nice, but it wasn't like a wow for me, didn't go above and beyond for me. There were some parts of it that I really did like. I loved the cultural representation here, and I think if I were like a hijab wearing devout Muslim woman, I may kind of respond to this differently because I would see myself being reflected in the pages. But since that's not the case, there was a bit of a, I guess, a disconnect, if you will, for me. And I do wish the story had a little bit more depth to it, but then I don't know if that's a reasonable expectation to have. But if you're looking for an Austen retelling and you want to play around with some some diverse fiction, this would be a really good option. And people like love this book. People rave about this book. This was Uzma Jalaluddin's first book, I believe, her debut novel, and it made her quite famous. And the last book that I finished in the month of February was Bride by Ali Hazelwood. I gave this book 3 stars. I partly think that's because I was in a bit of a reading slump, and no matter what I picked up, I just wasn't having it. I think that's also probably why Aisha at Last didn't get like the most love from me, but it was okay. It was okay. I will say it was obviously like much better than Twilight. So I think when people compare it to Twilight, it feels a little bit unfair. I like that it still had a bit of like a STEMinist focus. The main character, the female character, she's a coding expert, so it was nice kind of lens to have. I will say the spicy scenes didn't sit well with me for the first time. Like just the vampire werewolf spice and that crossover, and just her like feeding on him, like it felt icky to me. It felt, I don't want to say gross, but it just felt icky. It was very icky. So that didn't resonate with me, and there was a lot of that, and so I think that kind of made me also not rate this book very highly. But do I regret reading it? Absolutely not. I think it was a fun, like, I don't read paranormal romance, so it was fun, and it was a pretty cool story actually. A lot of depth to it, a lot of layers to it. It's just what was putting me off is like, the classic like possessive guy. He was a little bit possessive for sure, and just the blood drinking, I guess, not my fave. Okay, after that I read Miss Austen Investigates #1. This one is called The Hapless Milliner, and it's by Jessica Bull. This is like a brand new book. I just saw it on Kobo and I was like, oh, a Jane Austen retelling. Except it's not a Jane Austen retelling. It's not a retelling of one of her books. This is like a retelling of Jane Austen. So while she's writing books, she's also solving murder mysteries. But it was fun. I gave it around 3.5, 3.75 stars. Very arbitrary. So don't go too much on that. But this was interesting. Again, set in Regency era, but it follows like Jane Austen as she's writing Lady Susan. And there is a murder at this like party that she's at, and she decides to solve it. I did feel that it was a little bit too long. I don't think it needed to be this long of a book. I will be honest with you. The story was nice for sure. It's interesting. I couldn't find out who it was that did the murder. Like, I was genuinely surprised. I wasn't shocked by the end, like, but it was a good surprise that, oh, this was a murder. So it wasn't predictable, I guess, in that sense, at least not to me. Will I be continuing this series? Probably not, but it was a nice, like, refreshing, I guess, change. I think people are really loving this book on Goodreads. My response wasn't so overwhelmingly great, but to each their own, and definitely give it a shot if that's something that speaks to you. I just pick up everything that's Regency era romance related, more or less, and that's what drew me to this. But it wasn't bad. It was a pretty good book. I also finally, after like 2 months of listening to it, finished Emily Wilde's Map of the Other Lands by Heather Fawcett. This is part 2 to Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, and I finished it. I actually listened to it more than I read it, so my book is still pretty like pristine here, but I gave it around 3.5 stars. I did like the first one better, I'll be honest. There's a third one coming out next year. I don't know if I'll pick it up, to be honest with you. That's my problem with series. There's rarely any series that I like continuously enjoy reading, but this was pretty good. There's a lot more world building, a lot more like other characters come in. If you're not familiar with the series, it's set in I want to say late 1800s perhaps, but it follows Emily Wilde. She is a professor of Fae in Oxford, and she is, you know, like going on expeditions and doing professorly things and teaching classes, and she has these like encounters with Fae, and like it's a cozy not a cozy mystery, it's a cozy fantasy for sure, quite low stakes, though the second one definitely felt like it had higher stakes, but it's a cute series if you are wanting to get into fantasy, but you know, high fantasy feels like really overwhelming with intense world building. Like, this is not it. There's really good amount of world building, but it's a very accessible start to a fantasy. I love, the geek in me absolutely loved how she has like little footnotes at the end. So it's like her, basically the whole book is like her journal entry as things are happening, and she has little footnotes. I absolutely love that. I really like Emily Wilde herself as a character, but I think just the book, maybe I read both of them back to back, and so I feel like, okay, like I had enough of this story. Maybe I will read the third one next year, we'll see, but it was pretty good. Now, speaking of the books that I am actually currently reading, there's a number of books that I'm reading. I do like simultaneous reading, or like 5 books at the same time. I have actually been reading Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This is considered a classic, and I didn't know that, and I wasn't too familiar with it. So I picked it up. I'm a little bit late to the game, but this seems so intriguing. It's like a classic like murder mystery, I guess, but this is about, well, a main character. We don't even get to know her name, I guess, but there's a main character. She marries this older rich guy. She moves into his house, and there are reminders of his dead ex-wife everywhere, Rebecca. And that's what I know about it. I don't want to know more. If you have read it, let me know your thoughts. I'm only like 44 pages through. Like every classic, it is a bit of a denser read, and it's slower for me. It's not like a bingeable book, at least not for me, but I'm kind of enjoying my slow pace. I have high hopes. I'm looking forward to being spooked and intrigued and wowed by this, but hopefully I'll be able to finish it in the month of March. But if you have read Rebecca, let me know what your thoughts are. Here are 2 books that I have been slowly reading for a while, and I'm just not having it, and I don't know if I will finish them, but this one breaks my heart to say it. But this is The Last Grand Duchess by Brian Turnbull. She also wrote Woman Before Wallace, which I really loved. I love my historical fictions, but this is like a chapter of history that like I'm so intrigued by. This is basically about like the Romanovs, the last Tsar of Russia, whose family was executed in the early 1900s, and this follows the story of Olga Romanov, who is the eldest daughter, I believe, of the Romanov siblings, and this follows them from like when the revolutionaries took over the palace, to their exile, and eventually to their death. And I really want to love this, but there's just something about the pacing of this book is not for me. I am 100 pages in, and honestly, I haven't picked this up in like 3 weeks, and I hate to say that because I really wanted to love it. So I don't think I will DNF this, because I do love historical fiction, and I love the Russian kind of imperial history. I find it so fascinating, and especially like the unfortunate ending of the Romanov line. Like, it's very intriguing to me. So I will still read it, but I will be honest, I am having a hard time, and I wish it wasn't so, but that is the case. I'm also having a really hard time finishing The Duke Gets Desperate by Diana Quincy. This is her Sirens in Silk series. This is the first one in the series. As you can see, I'm almost done. I still have like about 150-ish pages to go. And this is honestly, it's feeling like quite a bit of drag. I hate to say it, because I enjoy Diana Quincy's books. I enjoy her other novels. Enjoy the premise, like I was saying, Palestinian woman, you know, meets like British royalty, finds love. Like, I like that whole premise, but this one's a bit of a drag. So this is basically about Rhea Darvish, and then the Duke of Strickland. Rhea Darvish basically is like an American Arab merchant woman, and she discovers that her cousin sister, who was married to a duke, has died and left her the castle. And obviously the heir of that duke, the new duke, is obviously pissed, and so she goes to England, and then there's like romance between her and the duke, and all that sounds really exciting. And they're trying to discover how did her cousin die, because like some people think she died, some people think she was like pushed. So anyway, so just trying to figure that out. But it's just, it doesn't need to be this long. Like, it doesn't need to be this long for me. Like, the story is just being stretched, and their misunderstandings are quite frustrating. I find it a little bit annoying when romance books just have like a misunderstanding thrown in there just for the sake of it, and just to throw you a curveball, and it doesn't make sense. And this has a little bit of that. So this is far from my favorite Diana Quincy. I will probably still finish it because I need to know how it ends, but I'm not rushing to finish it, unfortunately. I wouldn't, if you are wanting to start a Diana Quincy, maybe I'll start with the other series, the Clandestine Affairs series, maybe not this one. I also recently started The Gold Diggers by Sanjana Sathian, like 5 pages into this, so I'm not even gonna say I'm like currently reading this. I just started it. I don't know what to expect. I don't even know how to describe this book, to be honest with you. This is like a magical realism book about these like South Asian characters who are, so some of it is set in Mumbai, I believe, in India, and some of it is set in modern day US, following this Indo-Canadian family. But it has like something to do with like magic, because it talks about like the minority myth in like a really hilarious way. Apparently it has really amazing reviews, but it's basically about this like second generation teenager, Neil. He's growing up in Atlanta. He's like kind of obsessed with his neighbor Anita, but then he discovers that there's a potion made from gold that can kind of help him be successful and be like a model minority. And that's kind of what I know about it, and it sounds intriguing for sure, but I have not heard anybody talk about this, so I don't know really like too much of what to expect. Like I said, I am like page 14, so like handful of pages. I will certainly kind of keep you posted on this, but yeah, like the tagline here is, how far would you go for a piece of the American dream? Sounds intriguing. And the last book that I'm currently reading that I'm having a hard time putting down, actually, thankfully, is Clytemnestra by Costanza Casati. I really hope I pronounced all that right. But Clytemnestra, if you're familiar with the Greek mythology, I love Greek mythological retellings. Like I always say on this channel, I have a really odd and eclectic taste. Okay, I go from, like, my taste varies from Regency era romance to feminist Greek retellings, and there's no one kind of genre that I like. I read a lot of different genres that you wouldn't think that someone with my tastes would read. Anyway, so last year I read a number of amazing, actually in the last 2 years, I read a number of amazing Greek mythological retellings. And so I recently picked up Clytemnestra. I have not read anything by this author before. So, you know, some of the more popular authors who do these feminist retellings are Natalie Hayes, and you have Jennifer Saint. She's done Electra, which was great. She's done Ariadne, which I have, but I haven't read. But this author seems like to be new on the scene, but Clytemnestra is really heavily rated. So I have read a little bit about Clytemnestra and like some of the other stories, but never really read a story that is like solely hers. But if you're unfamiliar with her, if you've seen Troy with Brad Pitt, you'll remember Helen of Troy. She's actually Helen of Sparta. Clytemnestra is her sister. So you would remember Agamemnon, who went to kind of war for his brother to help his brother Menelaus get his wife Helen back from Troy back to Sparta. So Clytemnestra is her sister and Agamemnon's wife. If you are familiar with your Greek mythology, she's also the mother of Electra and Iphigenia. And I mean, this is not a spoiler. Like, Clytemnestra murdered Agamemnon after he came back from the Trojan War. It's not a spoiler. It's like a well-known fact. So I really wanted to read more about her. So this story is like about her basically. So it starts off from when she's younger. It's a really long book actually. And now we are at the place where Paris has come to Sparta and Helen is starting to kind of socialize with him, and we know it's going to lead to the Trojan War. So we're at that space. I'm enjoying the storytelling here. It's quite fast paced. I do wish like there are some chapters in here where I'm like, I didn't need this detail, or I didn't need this side story. But overall, I am liking it. I am 60%, almost 60% through. I only have a little bit to go. But I will be buying likely a physical copy of this to add it to my collection of Greek mythological retellings. Okay, that's it. Those are all the books I have recently read and I'm currently reading. Let me know if any of them spark your interest. And if you have any thoughts on the types of videos you would like for me to do on this channel, please also leave them down below. Thanks for joining me here, everyone. See you soon. Happy reading.